Alex, thanks for being here.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me, Josh.
Alex, look, I'm hearing all kinds of mixed things about this de-dollarization movement. Some people say it's not going to affect anything. Some say it's never going to, risk the world reserve currency of the U.S. dollar. What's the reality with this? Why does this matter?
Well, it's happening very quickly, Josh. More and more nations, more and more governments, more and more central banks are turning against the dollar. They're making agreements with the communist Chinese, with the Russians, et cetera, to start doing trade in their own currencies. And this includes even governments that historically have been close allies of the United States. The French just recently did their first deal with the communist Chinese in yuan for liquefied natural gas. You've got the Brazilians now have made an agreement with the CCP to start trading in local currencies rather than the U.S. dollar. So this is actually happening now. It's happening very, very quickly. And the implications are hard to overstate. I interviewed a number of economists, members of Congress, and if and when this happens, America will be forever changed. Our standard of living will be dramatically reduced. The value of the dollar will be decimated very rapidly if it happens rapidly. And so people need to be paying attention to this, and unfortunately, most are not.
Now, I mean, how close are we to that? The idea of the U.S. dollar getting devalued, or our quality of life going down. What's the reality with this? How far away is this?
Well, different people that I spoke with had different perspectives on this. There were some who believed it was imminent, that any moment now we could wake up and find out that there's been an agreement among a lot of the key governments of the world to stop using the dollar, and it could happen very, very suddenly. There are others who say, well, the U.S. still has these advantages, the deepest and most liquid capital markets in the world, the so-called network effect. Actually, the head of the IMF, Kristalina Georgieva, just came out and actually talked about the gradual shift away from the dollar, and she noted that right now there's not really a viable alternative. But the CCP, actually back in 2009, the head of the People's Bank of China, put out a report calling for de-dollarization and actually for changing the international reserve from the U.S. dollar to a quote-unquote asset that's issued by the IMF called the special drawing right. And unfortunately, as crazy as it may seem, the Treasury Secretary at the time, Timothy Geithner, actually expressed his openness to that idea during a hearing, during a meeting at the Council on Foreign Relations. So these are some of the same people who are still in power today with the Biden administration. This is a very serious threat.
Well, explain that to me. Alex, I know you've done a lot of reporting on the IMF, on, of course, the United Nations. You've done a lot on the World Economic Forum. I know you've even gone to some of their meetings to try to report on it. Who's involved with this? Is it really just the Chinese Communist Party? Who's pushing this?
Well, the CCP is a big player, obviously, but unfortunately, there are many players right here in the United States that are pushing this as well. Now, in interviewing members of Congress who are taking this threat seriously, there are several who've introduced a bill that would repeg the U.S. dollar to gold, partly as an effort to mitigate against this threat. Every single one of them, Congressman Paul Gosar, Congressman Alex Mooney, and Congressman Biggs, have all shown and have all argued that this would not be possible if it were not for the Biden administration and some of the quote-unquote elites that are devaluing the American currency, that are spending money like it's going out of style. I mean, they're talking about raising the debt ceiling and spending trillions more dollars. So the CCP would not be successful if it were not for the domestic forces that are facilitating this. And if you look at the comments made by former Treasury Secretary Timothy Geithner while he was Treasury Secretary, that suggests to me pretty strongly that there are actually people within Washington, D.C., within New York, who want this to happen. The question is just when rather than if.
Geez, so it's not just a CCP thing. It's traitors in our midst, so to speak.
That's right.
Well, what do they have to gain from it? Who gains from this, and what do they get out of it?
Well, it would result in a wholesale realignment of the geopolitical order. One of the things that underpins American dominance in the world system today is the fact that the U.S. dollar is the global reserve. And that was a logical thing for a long time. After World War II, the world was in ruins. 50% of global GDP was the U.S. economy. And, of course, the dollar was still pegged by gold at that time. So, it wasn't that they could just print infinite amounts of it. Then we lost the gold backing, formally at least under Nixon. It had already started eroding. That moved then to the petrodollar, where certain petroleum exporting countries agreed to only trade oil for U.S. dollars. So that kept it kind of stable, kind of rock solid for some decades. But now we're coming to a point where if and when that breaks. And it's already showing signs of breaking. The Saudis have even started saying that they will sell oil in other currencies. The real beneficiaries will be the Russians, the Chinese. The real losers will be Americans. And again, it's not just the currency, it's not just the purchasing power, it's not just the standard of living. This will impact every area of life. This will impact geopolitical relations. This could actually put the CCP in a dominant position on the world stage, and that should be very concerning to folks.
Well, and that brings us to, I think the main question here, which is, what's the real motivation? Is it just financial interest? Is it the CCP trying to overtake America? Is it just greedy people? What is the main motivation you're seeing with the groups pushing this?
Well, I think there's a convergence of interest, Josh. So the CCP, obviously, they want more power, they want more victims, they want more money, they want more control over humanity, they want more control over the international financial system. But then there are the folks in the United States who are working in tandem with this. I mean, a real obvious individual would be Bill Gates, right? This is a guy who has openly worked with Xi Jinping, who's openly worked with the highest levels of the CCP power structure. Same thing with Klaus Schwab, the head of the World Economic Forum. In fact, he's called the CCP a model, a role model for many countries. So you have this very bizarre situation where you have alleged capitalists. I mean, George Soros said about a decade ago that communist China should own the new world order in the same way that the United States owned the old world order. So I think you have a convergence of interests here where totalitarians of different varieties, right, not just ideological communists, but also people who like the idea of lording it over their fellow human beings, have a vested interest in seeing the old American system based on God-given rights, based on Constitution, based on rule of law, based on inalienable or unalienable freedoms, going by the wayside, going onto the ash heap of history, and having the Chinese model where basically you don't have rights, you don't have freedoms, the government will tell you what to do. And so even very powerful individuals in our country have publicly expressed admiration. I mean, Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada, said that of all the systems in the world, he admires the CCP system the most. So this is very, very problematic for those of us who appreciate freedom.
Well, and I think this brings up another thing too. These groups, they keep talking about the multipolar world order. And I've seen Russia talk about it. I've seen the World Economic Forum talk about it. I've seen the United Nations talk about it. I've even seen people in the Biden administration talking about it. And I think for a lot of people, it's a slogan without meaning. Tell us what that means, this multipolar world order.
Yeah, and you're right that numerous people in the Biden administration have publicly expressed their support for this. In fact, Bathsheba Crocker, who was the Assistant Secretary of State for International Organizations during the Obama administration, now she's serving in a different senior diplomatic role for the Biden administration. She publicly was quoted in Communist Chinese propaganda organs celebrating the rise of Communist China in international affairs, in the kind of global governance system. So you do have people at the highest levels of the government who actually are very, very supportive of this. And when you look at kind of the goal that they have expressed with this multipolar world order, it means by definition the United States and its role in the world will be dramatically reduced. And the place that I first heard the term multipolar world order, Josh, this was actually from the Council on Foreign Relations, a very, very powerful think tank based right there in New York. They call themselves a think tank, but really they have dominated foreign policy making in the United States for generations, at least until kind of Reagan kind of put the brakes on them, and then Donald Trump kind of was hostile to some of their ideas. But they started calling for a shift toward a multipolar world order over a decade ago. That's how I knew that this was coming. The great U.S. Admiral Chester Ward, who spent 16 years as a member, said, if you want to know the policy of the U.S. government a couple years in advance, just get a copy of their magazine, get a subscription. It's called Foreign Affairs. They lay it all out. And so they've been publicly calling for this. They've been publicly building up the CCP. And again, these are not, kooky fringe. These are some of the most powerful power players in U.S. politics, in U.S. media, and in U.S. finance.
Yeah, well, and Alex, I know we've discussed before on what America represents to the world, the ideas of human rights and the ideas of, the Pax Americana, the peace under America. What does it mean if that comes to an end? What's the alternative we're moving into?
Well, the ideals that our nation was founded on, right? Our founding fathers said these were self-evident truths, that we are all created equally, that we're all endowed by our Creator with the right to life, the right to property, the right to pursue happiness. I mean, these things are really what's at stake. If you look at the CCP's understanding of human rights, it is completely antithetical and completely incompatible with the American understanding of rights. And so actually, I like the way that Rich Higgins put it. He was the Director of Policy and Planning at the National Security Council under the Trump administration. He said what we're witnessing, this was back during the Trump administration, he passed away, but he said what we're seeing here is a Maoist insurgency that brings together globalists, Islamists, socialists, communists, all united with one goal. He said their goal was to destroy the United States of America, not just as a nation, but even as an ideal. And so if they can discredit the ideas that America is founded on, and the CCP is doing this very actively. In fact, a decade ago, they put out an editorial saying that the world needed to be de-Americanized, that America was just turmoil and ridiculous. Once our system, which produced the greatest advances in human liberty, in human prosperity, in peace, is discredited, and we move toward this kind of China-centric model, it means, quite frankly, the end of human freedom.
Well, Alex, just last question. People always want to know, well, that sounds terrible. What do we do about it?
Well, I'll be doing another article for the Epoch Times. In fact, it's getting ready. It's getting close. But I interviewed several members of Congress. They have a bill that would actually repeg the U.S. dollar to the gold standard, which would, in their view, inhibit the Federal Reserve's ability to just create endless amounts of money. It would limit Congress's ability to just endlessly spend money and assume that the Federal Reserve will monetize all the debt that they're pumping out. I've spoken with people who are working at the state level. In fact, in Texas, there was a bill. It didn't pass this session, but they're talking about either a special session or getting it done next year, where they would create transactional gold systems where you could buy and sell using gold that's stored at the Texas Gold Bullion Depository, which already exists, by the way. It's a government institution. So there's a lot of things at the personal level. I would recommend that people think very seriously about this. Talk to your financial advisor. Talk to whoever helps you with these things. There's a real chance that we could see some dramatic changes in the value of the dollar. And some people will profit off of it, but you need to be prepared. You need to be thinking about these things.
Geez, well, really important stuff. Alex, thank you as always. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Josh.